These are your chapter 3 notes on water and water's importance to life. All living things are going to require water. It's not a characteristic of life because it's not part of, well, I'm not going to say it's not part of life because life has water, but not all living things are going to be composed of maybe as much as water as other things. It's a requirement for life, if that makes a difference. It's not a part of what makes you alive, it's what you need to be alive. Our cells are made out of about 70 to 95% water, depending on the cell type. Water is polar, meaning that its overall charge is unevenly distributed. Oxygen region has more of a negative charge. Remember we talked about in the last video how oxygen is one of the more electronegative atoms, and hydrogen has more positive charge. The oxygen ends are attracted to the hydrogen ends of water molecules, and this creates the property of cohesion. In class, you're going to be doing a water booklet where you look at some of these properties. So here's water, several water molecules. Here's our central one. These oxygen, because they're fairly negative, this hydrogen end of this other water molecule is going to attract, and that's going to create a hydrogen bond. Remember, we talked about hydrogen bonds. They're weak bonds, right? It can be broken pretty easily, but it's still a bond. There's an attraction of this negative end to this positive end. And so these water molecules are going to stick together, and that's what cohesion is. Water's attraction to itself, or to other water molecules, not to the same atom. 4 emergent properties of water that contribute to Earth's sustainability for life. Cohesion, we just talked about, water's attraction to other water molecules. Moderation of temperature, so water can absorb a lot of heat and keep temperature fairly even. Floating of ice on water, that's going to insulate the life forms below. And it's a great solvent. And see your textbooklets for details of each of these properties. That's what you're using, not your textbooks, sorry, your booklets that you created. That's why you created them, is to give you a little more information about each of these. And I'm sorry, I didn't really pause very long. I hope you paused the video to sketch the water molecule. This is showing you a picture of how cohesion and adhesion work together to create something called capillary action. So water molecules are going to stick to each other, plus they are going to stick to other surfaces. And so this, column here is a bunch of cells in this tree. And these cells are going to allow these water molecules basically to attract to the sides of it, and it's going to pull the water up from the roots to the leaves. Trees or any plant doesn't get the majority of its water from rain on a leaf. It gets its water from the rain that pours down and goes into the water, and then the roots absorb it, and then they move the water up the trunk. A spider can, or other tiny insects can seemingly walk on water, and the reason is because of the surface tension that is created because water molecules stick to each other. Ice, when ice, those hydrogen bonds are going to be really pretty stable. They're not going to break as easily, and so that's going to create ice. Or ice is going to have more, I can't speak my words today. Ice is going to have more stable bonds because of that cold. And so that's going to help to provide an insulation for water life below. If you've ever wondered why, when the lake freezes over, why all the fish don't die. Well, first of all, fish can adapt to that cold temperature, which is a whole other unit, but that ice layer is not as deep as you might think. Now you get up into Canada and Minnesota, and you're still talking. You can drive on the ice. So you're talking multiple feet of ice, but it's still not going to be the entire depth. And so everything below it is going to be down there, and then that water is not going to be quite as cold obviously not to freezing point, and so that insulates them and allows them to survive. It's a great solvent, so you put salt in the water, and the water is going to help disassociate the sodium from the chloride, and it'll dissolve in that water, and that works for a lot of different salts. In the last chapter, we talked about a lot of pharmaceutical drugs being able to disassociate in water, and that being good for your body, because when you take that medicine, you want it to disassociate. And then another property of water is that it moderates temperature. So California can be really, really warm, okay? But right on the coast, which is where everybody talks about the winter is, because it's so nice all year long. The reason is actually because of the ocean there. It helps moderate temperature, which means the temperature is going to be pretty stable most of the time. It doesn't have a lot of ups and downs because that water can absorb a lot of that sun's energy to keep that temperature level. And that's also why we're made out of a lot of water, and we can absorb quite a bit of heat and still not change our temperature. Now, some of that is to do with the fact that we have a lot of water, and some of it is because we have. I'm making videos at school, and the bells are going off. We have a lot of water, and that part of that is that we can absorb a lot of water without too much of a drastic change in temperature. But also there's some homeostasis things going there where we basically have some internal thermostats that will kick it up a notch or drop it down a little as needed. Acids and bases. An acid is a substance that increases the hydrogen ion concentration. So they have more hydrogen ions than they have hydroxide ions. This is also sometimes just called a proton. Base, substance that reduces the hydrogen ion concentration, and you end up with more hydroxides than hydrogens. That's the difference between acid and base. It is the balance of hydrogen ions versus hydroxide ions. The pH scale ranges 0 to 14, but in the body, small amounts of change matter. For example, human blood is about 7.4, but if it drops to 7.0 or rises to 7.8 for more than a few minutes, a person cannot survive. So even though that scale doesn't seem like a lot, that's because even a little change makes a big difference. The difference between a 7 and an 8 is pretty drastic when you're talking about any kind of living cell. And that's just the pH we're talking about in blood. There are other cells that live at different pHs. I don't want you to think that all cells have to be at that pH. That is simply the pH of your blood. For example, the cells in the inner lining of the stomach, if they get up to a 7, that's not good for them because that's not a normal environment for your stomach. Your stomach is a lower pH. And here is kind of an idea of what you would find, what kind of products you would find on the pH scale. Soda is actually pretty acidic, which is why it eats away at the enamel on your teeth and it can cause ulcers in your stomach. Pure water is a 7. Human blood is going to be just a little bit more basic than that, but not by much. Inside of your intestines, not your stomach. Gastric juice is going to be up here on the more acidic scale. Battery acid even further. And now you think, oh my gosh, battery acid and gastric juice are only a difference of 1 on the pH scale. Like, our stomach's really acidic. Well, battery acid, the difference between a 1 and a 2, remember, on the pH scale is a big difference. So don't think that, you can drink some battery acid and be okay. And then you're talking down here, really basic, ammonia, bleach, oven cleaner. And you can see here where they're talking about the difference in the hydroxide versus hydrogen balance. A buffer is a substance that minimizes change in concentrations of H and OH. It does not necessarily maintain this is a misconception, it does not maintain a 7 pH, it does not maintain neutral, it just minimizes changes. So no matter what the buffer is in, so if the buffer is in your stomach, it's going to maintain that pH around a certain level. It's not going to be a 7, but it's going to maintain it. Buffers in your blood, they're going to maintain it around that 7.4 that is needed in the blood. Basically, the whole point of it is to prevent drastic changes in pH in living tissues. And we're going to do a buffer lab in this class. Acidification. Burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. You should know that by now. When these react with water, so you're talking in oceans, lakes, rivers, the water will become more acidic. And why is that? Because the carbon dioxide reacts with the water and it forms something called carbonic acid. That is going to lower the ocean pH because you're adding an acid. Okay, that's called ocean acidification. With acidic water, the extra hydrogen ions are going to combine with carbonate ions from the carbonic acid, and they are going to form something called bicarbonate ions. Now, why is this a problem? Because carbonate is required for marine life. A lot of times it's used for them to make shells, calcification. So what do you already kind of start seeing as a problem? I'm hoping you say if the carbonate is removed because of the extra H, then you don't have enough carbonate for the animals, the organisms to make their shells. I hope that's kind of where you were thinking about. And this just shows kind of an image of that or a picture of that. So carbon dioxide and water are going to react. Apologies. React together to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is then going to dissociate, and you're going to have these extra hydrogen ions, and that's going to come together with carbonate, and that's going to form bicarbonate, and then you've got a problem is your ocean life needs that carbonate to form their shells, and they don't have that because the hydrogens have taken it. And this is what it does. So coral reefs are being destroyed because there's not enough life forms that can form their shells. And why does that affect everything else? Because other things that don't have shells rely on things that do have shells for survival. Burning fossil fuels is also a source of sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxides, which react with rainwater in the air to form acid precipitation. Remember, a small change in pH can drastically affect all life, plants and animals that take in that water. So when it rains and that rain is a little bit more acidic than it should be, or a little bit not neutral, not a perfect pH of 7, then you can have a serious problem. And I know you're like, well, it's not burning my skin, you know. I realize that that's sometimes where we want to go with that thought is, well, it can't be acid rain, it's not burning, you know. But there are things that are not that are acids that don't burn necessarily. Think about soda, how far on that pH scale that was. That was still pretty down on the acidic, but you can pour soda on yourself and it not burn. Okay, and so there are problems with that acid level, even if it's just a little bit acidic. So we're saying is it's not a perfect 7. And that is the end of this.